God, during this season, for us anyhow, these 2 years of just being outside, you could say, of the four walls of the church, and just for me, just teaching, as some of you know, I teach at VCA. God has used this time for me to teach me a lot of lessons. And I look back and I'm like, wow, it's been a little bit of a challenging 2 years, God. Anytime now, I mean, you could make some adjustments. I mean, just let up a little bit. And I had a friend that was in town from Michigan, and he is a therapist, and him and I used to always have lunch together, and it would be like my free therapy session whenever we were in Michigan, and we would go to lunch and we would talk, and he would diagnose whatever he thought I had at the moment. But he was in town here, and I remember he called me and he said, hey, is there any way you could meet? And I said, sure. I mean, for you, let me drop whatever I'm doing. I want to come. Sure. And so he said, could you meet me at Disney Springs? And he's like, bring your family if you want. I'll have my family with. And so we met there, and I remember exactly where I was at, because he just ended up sitting down, and Charity and the girls, they just went off and they were looking at stuff, and he literally just had one of those moments that just slapped me around. I mean, it was painful. And he sat there and he said to me, you know what, God, I think in my spirit, I just feel like God is trying to teach you some valuable lessons right now. And he said, I think you need to lean a little bit further in, right? And so I literally, when he walked away, I said, I don't like you anymore. Go back to Michigan where you came from and enjoy the snow. And so he challenged me. He said, when you get a chance, he said, you should always lead with that. I said, lead with what? He said, you just need to be open and share at times. And so he challenged me when I have opportunities to speak. He said, share what God's doing. Right? So right now, the lesson that God is teaching me currently, not over the last few months, this is the current lesson. This I haven't even shared with my wife. That's how current it is, and she always gets nervous when I lead off like that. But one of the things that he's teaching me right now is the posture of leaning. And you might say, I didn't even know that was a posture. Me either. But you think about it, you start leaning. At some point you get a little nervous, because are you going to fall? Like, is anyone going to catch you? Like, are you going to fall on somebody? Like, I mean, I'm the biggest person in my house. Like, if I fall on any of them, I probably would hurt them, right? But he's been teaching me this moment just to lean. And I keep hearing in my spirit, he says, I'm teaching you something. But I'm leaning pretty far. I'm leaning to a point where I feel like I'm about to fall. Don't worry, I'm teaching you something. Lean in. If you're in my class over probably the last few weeks, you would hear me, because as God starts teaching me things, those words start coming out to my students. And I don't even know how many times in the last few weeks that I've continued to tell the students, hey, just lean into it. Just lean into it. Just lean into it. I think it makes me feel better, like I'm leaning, you lean with me, right? But I'm leaning. When it comes to missions, I'm just going to go. I'm just going to see what happens. God, right now, I just pray that you would just quicken. God, I pray right now that you would just speak. Holy Spirit, take control. Holy Spirit, I pray that the words that you want to be communicated would be clear, concise, would go to our hearts, our minds. You would be glorified at all times. Help me just to lean into that leading right now. Holy Spirit, take control in your name. I really felt like as you were talking, before you even got up here, Brooke, when Pastor was talking about missions, there was something there that just like, and it was almost like, hey, when you walk up, because I forgot that you were going to be here. When you walk up, I was about to actually say something about missions, because I just felt like the Holy Spirit was kind of like, I was like, okay. And then now Brooke comes up and she shares all this stuff and she shows us these videos, and some of you are just sitting there crying, and you're just like, I just wish. Let me just tell you something, that if you've never been on a missions trip, go. If you've never been on a missions trip, go. It will literally impact your world. You might say, I can't afford it. Hey, I couldn't afford it right now. If somebody said, hey, Brandon, you want to go on a missions trip? I'd be like, sure. How much is it going to cost? $2,000. Okay, send me a postcard. I remember the very first missions trip that I took. I was in college, North Central University. At the time, it was North Central Bible College before they changed it. And there was a bunch of students that we were going together on a missions trip. And it was an expensive trip. Back then, okay, this is a few years ago, okay? I'm a little older than some people guess. My wife and my girls helped me out. People never guess my age very, very, well, they're not very accurate, which is great. So I went to college in the mid to late 90s. And back then, it was a really expensive trip. And I was in my senior year, and I had nothing. Like, I had no money. And I was like, you know what, God, is this where I should go? And I prayed, because I always tell people, the first thing you do when you're presented, hey, you want to go on a mission trip, pray first. Step back, pray. Don't step back and open up the bank app and say, do I have the money? No, step back, pray. So I did, and I was like, okay, I'm supposed to go on this. There's no way I'm paying for this. So God provided every penny that I needed. And he provided so much extra that I was able to also pay for another student's almost their whole trip as well. And I have no idea where it came from. All I know is I said yes. I said yes. And now I can't tell you, I've lost track of how many mission trips that I've been on. I've kind of, the numbers probably it's probably over 20 mission trips that I've been on over the years. And I want to tell you, I just felt prompted to tell you about this one trip. Just stay with me for a second. This is a massive rabbit trail, I guess, if Pastor Greg was up here. So we know Matthew 28 super well, right? And it says for us, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We know that verse, right? We know that verse. We've said that verse. It's on T-shirts. I'm sure it's on some posters around this church, as many other churches. But we never read the first part that leads that kind of sums it up before you lead into it. And what does it say? All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Jesus came and he said, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. You've got that authority. I was on a mission trip. I'm not going to say the place. And it was a building trip. I was leading it. Had a bunch of guys there. And actually some ladies as well. And I got to be honest, a lot of ladies on that trip, they rocked it. They beat the guys. I mean, there was some really good people on that trip. And on that trip, we were in the middle of building, and I was a mess. I had, on those trips, you just take your worst clothes, or my wife and I would always go to Goodwill. We'd buy just some cheap things that we could, if we got dirty or we got them, they ripped, we would just leave them there. So I had work boots on. I looked a mess, and the missionary came over and said, Brandon, hey, I need you to come with me. Okay, where are we going to go? Just come with me. I've got an appointment with the police chief, and so you're going to come with me. I said, okay. So we get in the car, and speed to light car, and we take off, and we go down through wherever, and we get to the police station. And as we get to the police station, we get out of the car, and we start walking in. And let me tell you, I was like, I don't want to do anything wrong. Because they had on this area was very mountainous, and they had out of the cliffs there, they had cut rocks and kind of made caves, and then they put like bars over it, and that was their jail. Like, there's snakes in there. And let me just tell you something, I don't handle snakes very well. I really don't handle bats very well. And there's gonna be both of those in there, and probably spiders, right? And so I'm walking by their jail, which is these cliffs, there are these holes in these rocks with bars, and I'm like, dear God, I do not want to get in there. So we go in, they take me upstairs to the police chief's office, and for some reason I was taller than that country, and I don't think I'm that tall, but I'm like literally having to walk kind of and watch my head, and we sit down. And so it's the normal introduction, and we're talking back and forth, and here's what you have to know. This was a Spanish-speaking country, and my Spanish is excelente. Is that how you say that? No, it's horrible. Of all the trips, I've never picked up anything. Everybody makes fun of me all the time. All my friends, because they know that my Spanish is so bad. And so we get there, and I'm using, obviously, the interpreter, and we're going back and forth, and I'm talking with this chief of police, and we're going back and forth, and we're just kind of getting to know. And I don't even know what the point of this is. And you might say, what is even the point of this? It's coming. At some point, the chief, she started talking, and she started talking really, really fast. And the missionary looked at me and said, I'm not going to interpret right now. I'll fill you in later. And so I just sat there. She went on for over 10 minutes and didn't even stop. And I'm just sitting there. I'm just sitting there. Just listening to a language that I don't know, that I don't speak. Just sitting there. And then the Holy Spirit started translating for me. And as I sat there, the more and more that I sat there, the more and more that I just started to get the words, they just in my head. And so when she finally finished, after 10 minutes of talking straight, I literally leaned over to the missionary and I said, this is what I need you to say. And I went through this whole list. And the missionary looked at me, and her mouth dropped. Like, what in the world? I know where your Spanish is, and there's no way. And I said, the Holy Spirit. And so she turned to this chief and said, Brandon, here's all the things that he said, and went through this whole list. Obviously, I don't know what she said because I don't speak Spanish, but she went through this whole list. When I walked out of the police station that day, I had an invitation to come back to that country and do school assemblies, all because of that moment. I got on the plane, I flew back to the U.S., and I had this like, okay, God, what in the world just happened? I'm sure you've had some of these. Are we supposed to be missionaries? Like, what in the world? And I was like, well, if we're supposed to literally, because we've talked about it a few times, kicked it around, but if we're supposed to be missionaries, then you're going to have to speak to the one that's a little shorter than I am, that has blonde hair, because I'm not sure. Hey, we're still in the U.S. today, so that wasn't our moment to go overseas. Jared used to always, I would come back from somewhere over anywhere around the world when I'd go on a trip. I'd come back and I'd be on the plane and I'd be like, okay, when I get back, we're going to sell one of the cars. We're going to downsize. We're going to move into a trailer. Like a mobile home. We're going to get rid of most of our clothes. We only need clothes for 3 days and then we'll just wash in 3 days. We're going to get rid of our couch. We really don't need a couch. She used to hate whenever I'd go by myself on a trip, because when I would come back, I'd want to sell everything. Why? Because you see the rest of the world, and you see how blessed we really are. So to follow back up, when I was on that plane back, and I said, God, if you're really opening some door, then you're going to have to speak to both of us. And God didn't direct us that way, but God did open that door. And we ended up going back to that country, and literally they had a police officer that went with us, and we went school to school to school to school all over that part of that country, and literally had an open invitation to go into these schools and literally do school assemblies, just one after another, after another, after another. And you might say, why? Jesus came and he said, all authority in heaven, on earth, has been given to me. This is obedience. I'm not anything great. I'm not anything special. I just literally sat there listening to somebody talk in a language that I don't know. And I had a Holy Spirit that was my translator at the moment and shared and filled in all the gaps. All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. You might say, well, Brandon, there's no way I can go on a mission trip. This is not a possibility. Here's our little connection that God kind of confirmed. Then do it here. Do it here. Your mission field's outside these walls. You might say, I'm too old. I've just gotten to a point. I don't think I can go. It wouldn't be safe for me to go. Maybe you have some conditions and you're just like, I can't be out of the United States. If something happened to me, medically, what would happen? One of our friends literally 2 weeks ago was just in the Amazon, and he got deathly sick. They almost had to life flight him out of the Amazon. I mean, so do it here. Do it here in Lakeland. And take that verse and say, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Then go for and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So years ago, and this is where I'll wrap things up and bring it to a close. Years ago, I would struggle with it because missions has always been a very soft spot on both of our hearts. I mean, my wife has went on just as many mission trips, not quite as many, but growing up, she would go mission trip after mission trip. And we joke with each other. I'm like, hey, have you been to Japan? And she'd be like, no, have you been to England? I'm like, no. So we joke around, not really. She'll probably tell you that I always win because I've been to more places, and she would say that she has to stay home and take care of the girls, which is not entirely true, but okay, whatever. So I always struggled with this whole thing. Like, I'm willing to pay and go on a trip, but am I willing to go across the street and talk to my neighbor? I'm willing to, literally make sure my passport's updated and, take off, right, for whatever it's been. I mean, there was one trip, I was gone, I think, 17 days, and Charity was pregnant, and she got very deathly sick. She was really, really concerned, and I was in a very volatile place that I won't even say the country I was at. I actually was concerned I was actually not going to even make it back to the United States, and she was home, and she was super sick, and I didn't even know this. We would send texts back and forth, but I mean, it wasn't, and I got so sometimes focused on going, and I thought, what about our neighborhood? The first church I was on staff at, I was praying one day, and I really felt like that God said, buy an ice cream truck. I really did. I've really felt like God said to buy an ice cream truck. No, let me rephrase it. For our church to buy an ice cream truck. And so I went home and I shared it with Charity, and she said, I really don't think that's a good idea. And I said, I think it's an awesome idea. So I prayed on it some more, and then just kept, I kind of kept it we were traveling, and we were actually down here in Lakeland, speaking at Evangel Christian School when it was at Carpenter's. And we were speaking at an event there, and our host literally said, I was thinking some church should buy an ice cream truck. And I'm like, what did he say? Then we went home, back to Michigan, and we're in Michigan. And one day, right after that, I'm sitting in staff meeting, and the pastor says, I was reading this article about a church in Hawaii that literally bought an ice cream truck, and they started serving their community. And I'm like, what did he just say? I'm like, okay, I'm getting the picture here. I'm going into the ice cream business. I mean, I love ice cream, but we're going all in. And so I went to the board, at the church, I had asked to go to the board, have a special meeting. I just said, hey, could you just hear me out? I really think we should buy an ice cream truck. And I mean, some of the guys on the board, they were like, no, we don't see it. Like, really, our church is not in the business of ice cream. Our church is in the business of something totally different. I'm like, listen, picture this. Every Saturday, that ice cream truck drives up and down the streets of our city with that awful music playing that's so, like, it gets stuck in your head. And we literally just give out free ice cream. We just give it out. It's not for sale. We just give ice cream away all summer long, every Saturday. And it was a brilliant plan, because finally they did buy into it, and they let me buy an ice cream truck. Well, they said this. They said, we'll agree to you can buy our church can buy an ice cream. Our church will buy an ice cream truck. I said, that's awesome. They said, but we have no money in the budget for it. So if this is a God thing, then the money's going to be there. And so the money was, and we got an ice cream truck, and it was so cool. And it was awesome until the fact that every Saturday, all summer long, Brandon was the ice cream truck driver. The first summer was definitely very much labor-intensive on my part. 7,000 people got free ice cream that first summer. 7,000 people got ice cream that first summer. We were known as the church that gave away ice cream. All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations. Hey, you may not be able to be like this young lady right here and fly to South America. You may not be able to go on one of these trips that Pastor Raphael is getting ready and preparing and going to, hey, guess where we're going to go? El Salvador or Belize. I love Belize. It's a great country. You may not be able to. Good news. All authority has been given to you. Now go and make disciples right outside those walls, right here in this city. This is our missions field. We don't have to go. Now I want to encourage you, because I could keep going about story after story after story that's happened on missions trips, and I'm telling you, I'm not exaggerating. I could go on for hours about it. I could also tell you the horror stories that have happened on missions trips, ones that I have the scars from. But listen, all it is about obedience. It's just about obedience. Who's that person that you sit next to at work that's just awful? What's going on in their life? Serious, what's going on in their life? Who's that neighbor that you have next door and they're tough to live next to? What's going on in their life? Who's that coworker that you just hope that you're not on the same team, that you avoid at all costs? What's going on with them? All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. You have the answer. You have the good stuff. You have the stuff they need. Your missions field is here, and it's now. I mean, literally last Sunday, you heard the message. It's time for us to step up and say, hey, you know what? We're just gonna love people. We're just gonna love people. What happens if they don't love you back? That's their choice. We're just gonna love.